to do. But yes, let's move on then, and let's start to think about the breaking down what this whole thing about presence is. So hang on, let me just go back to sharing my screen. Here we are. So yeah, when we think about presence and persuasion, so think about, you know, what does it take to have some presence and to be able to persuade people. So the ancient Greek rhetoric, which was basically the art of speech and persuasion, was three parts. It was you had to have knowledge, which was called logos, and that's for you to be persuasive and for you to have presence. You need to have something to say, right? You need to have some knowledge, some content. You need to be able to demonstrate some logic and some strong reasoning. So that's the kind of content part, if you like, of being powerful and persuasive and having presence. You also need to have purpose, what the Greeks called ethos. So that's around credibility, character, your values, what you stand for, what you're all about, and does that inspire trust? And the last bit they talked about was passion or pathos, and that's really all about engaging people's emotions, feelings, passion, commitment. They say that, you know, emotion carries. People are persuaded more by emotion than they are facts and logic, but of course you need both. So when we think about how we persuade people and how we have presence, we have to have some of these core things. We have to know what we're talking about. We have to be able to have a reasoned point or argument. Some of presence is about what are you projecting in terms of your character and your credibility? And can you do that in a way that isn't sterile facts, but is also about engaging people's emotions and their feelings as well, because that's what actually sells. So that's kind of the backdrop of it. And when we think about that, we think, well, how do we do some of that? How do we actually execute some of that? Well, one of the things that we need to be aware of when thinking about things like, well, how do we do ethos? How do we convey that we are a person of weight and of value? Now, some of that comes down to how people understand verbal communications. Sure, you've perhaps seen this chart before, but you know what it tells us is essentially that the words that we say, the content, isn't actually the main thing in terms of having presence and being persuasive. Actually, so it's about 10% on words, but about 40% comes across from your tone of voice. So if you're monotone and boring and dull, then actually that is not going to create presence anywhere. And equally, there's an awful lot that people read automatically in your body language. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But what all this information suggests is that actually presence, particularly, people read so much just from the way you look, just from the way you walk. And I don't mean, you know, what you're wearing or whatever, but I mean the way you walk into a room, the way you hold yourself will tell people an awful lot about you, and will quite often provoke their response positively or negatively towards you. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, these are some of the things when we start digging into the surface level that says, yes, let's have presence and gravitas. What does that mean? How do we do that? We need to start looking at some of how we use our voice and our body, as well as what we're actually saying. And, you know, today we're not going to focus on the logos, the words and the content, and, you know, what your story is, what your policy is, what your argument is. We're going to concentrate on how you get that across. So I like to think of these as the pillars of presence. So yes, for sure, you have to have this stuff down here. like we said, you've got to have a good argument, etc. You've got to have a reason for being there. Beyond that, how do you get this across? Well, we're going to look at these three things. We're going to look at how you use your voice, what language you use, and I'm not talking about English. I'm not talking about whether you swear a lot or not. I'm talking about just some of the vocal habits, some of the words and phrases that you use, and are they helping you and projecting presence, or are they actually undermining you a little bit? I'm going to talk about the whole body language thing, non-verbal, and combining both voice and non-verbal. We're going to talk a little bit about pace, and also the all-important mindset elements. What are you telling yourself? What do you believe in the first place? Because without that, none of these things will work terribly well if your start point is that you don't have a lot of self-belief. If you can put all that together, and those things all start adding up, then you will be congruent, and people will read your body language and your vocal tone as congruent, and they'll read that as authentic, and they'll believe you. So that's kind of the model. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to go through each of that. As I go through that, I encourage you to self-assess. Think about, if you want to, take a picture of that, or write down the areas, because what I'm going to encourage you to do is, as I talk about each one, I would like you to give yourself a score out of 10. So if 10 is maximum presence and 0 is no presence whatsoever, when you think about how you use your voice, for example, do you think your voice gives you great presence or not? Or maybe somewhere in between. So calibrate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Do that. So as we go through and talk about each of these things, be thinking about, is this something I'm strong at and I can leverage? Is this something that perhaps I need to do a bit of work on? And when we go back into the groups, then I'll encourage you to share feedback on that basis, to say, yes, okay, what did other people see of you? And, you know, compare your self-assessment with what feedback they give you. So yeah, do take a screenshot of that, or a picture of it, or just write down those voice, language, congruence, pace, non-verbal, and self-belief, so that you can do this self-assessment piece. Okay, so let's start with the whole idea of self-belief. I work with a brilliant voice coach sometimes with clients, and she always says that you're never going to speak well, you're never going to have presence if you don't start with the intent to be heard. The intent to be heard, right? So, and this is part of self-belief. If actually your mind is telling you you would rather crawl under a rock and just not be there, then actually your intention to get your message across to people just isn't there. So, you know, your start point is to genuinely feel and tell yourself that you deserve to be there and that you've got something valuable to say. And, you know, sometimes we can be our own worst enemies, can't we? You've perhaps heard of this phrase of self-talk. I don't want to suggest that we're all schizophrenic, but we all talk to ourselves in our own heads, don't we? Most of the time, we're not actually very conscious of what we're saying to ourselves. But for example, if you go into a room for a meeting or a presentation or a selection speech, if you go in there and your self-talk is saying, you're not very good, really, are you? You're not very experienced. Oh, you're going to mess this up. It's going to be awful. If that's the kind of tape that's running in your head, it's not going to help you. And, you know, sometimes, as I say, we talk to ourselves in ways we would never dream of talking to other people. We can I think women particularly are very good at being our own worst critics. So, tune into what you're telling yourself. And if what you're telling yourself is not helping your self-belief and your intention to be heard, then change it. Choose proactively to be saying different things to yourself. Choose to be saying, I have something important to say here. I have some valuable lived experience that these people need to hear. I'm going to contribute to this, and it's going to be good. So yeah, just be aware of what you're telling yourself. Don't self-sabotage. One of the reasons we do that a lot, and particularly again, I think this is a thing that women do. There's a brilliant TED talk. If you've never watched it, I highly commend it to you. It's called Brave, Not Perfect. And it talks about the whole idea that as a society, we raise boys to be brave and girls to be perfect. If you want to know more, well, that's 12 minutes of your life well spent watching that video, I have to say. And both of those are cages. Okay, they're cages for the men as well. And they're certainly cages for women. So many women have these perfection drivers that they don't feel okay, they don't feel adequate if they're not perfect. So that's one of the things that gets in the way of self-belief. If you're always telling yourself that you're not quite good enough, or you're not perfect, you haven't got it 100%, then that is going to damage your self-belief. So good enough is good enough. Hold on to that. And don't beat yourself up. So yeah, another thing is that is particularly the way women are socialized, is we're socialized to be the people pleasers. We're the ones that hold it all together and smooth everything down and make sure everybody's okay. That is also a way to feel constantly not good enough, because you're never going to please all the people all the time. And particularly in politics. So get used to the idea that you're not going to please all the people all the time. And again, don't let that get in the way of your belief in your own beliefs, values, and goals. So yeah, there's a lot here. These are a few bullet points, I guess, in something that's probably could have you doing a coaching series for years on this basis. But the point is, if there's anything in your own mind that is causing you to doubt yourself, that has to be the start point to deal with. Because you can be taught all kinds of speaking or presentation techniques. None of them really work if you don't believe in yourself to start with. So that's one of the most important ones. Let's talk about body language. So again, people read body language in automatically. The way it's our mammal brain, right? It's our basic survival systems have attuned our brains to very rapidly read other people. It's why they say, first impressions count, right? We all make a judgment very quickly. And it's not because we're judgmental, it's because our brains are wired that way, so we can threat assess really quickly. Is this personal thing in front of us something we have to fight or run away from? Is it going to kill us or eat us, or is it going to be okay? And that's the way our brains are wired. So people look at other people, they read their body language, and they automatically read a lot into that subconsciously. So unless you're particularly interested in body language, you're probably not looking at somebody going, oh, well, she's doing this and she's doing that, and her face is doing that, and her arms are doing this, and her toes are doing that. And that means I do, but that's me and I'm a geek. But most people read body language very subconsciously. But they read it and it tells them something. They either read you and go, this is a person of high status and consequence, or they don't. And it can happen literally within seconds. It happens the minute you walk into a room. And it certainly happens the minute you stand up to speak and everybody focuses on you. So some of what we've got here is some of the things that historically and traditionally women get a little bit wrong. So one of the things in body language is that if you want to project somebody of stature and somebody of presence and authority, you need to take up space. And yet, here's the thing, the socialization is women, small, good. Men, big, good. So women are socialized not to take up a lot of space. So when you add that to a certain amount of nerves, what tends to happen is a lot of women adopt body language that makes them smaller. So they hug themselves like this. This is a classic defensive gesture from the animal kingdom, either making yourself smaller, head down, holding yourself, protecting yourself in some way. The same with crossing legs. So the number of women that will do something like this, that will have all their weight, for example, on one hip, will look unbalanced, same here, or will stand like this with their legs crossed, all of which and by the way, people read body language in clusters. So if you do one thing, if you just happen to be sitting there with your arms crossed like that, that doesn't mean you're bored. Just means it's comfortable. If you're sitting there with your arms crossed and you look and you're yawning and your eyes are drooping, then you're bored. Right? So it's usually more than one thing that sends a loud body language message. But when you've got two or three things together, like, for example, here, crossed arms, crossed legs, those kind of things, that can start sending a message that this person is feeling a bit defensive and not very confident. So yeah, one of the things is take up space. When you go into a meeting, don't pile your book or your laptop or your bits and pieces in a nice, small, neat pile in front of you. Spread out, take up space. Try it on the tube or the train, try a bit of man spreading. Just take up space. Men don't have that problem. But yes, so that is definitely one thing to think about. And again, the stance and the stature is like, again, you look much more solid, grounded, powerful and authoritative if your stance is balanced, rather than imbalanced on one hip or the other. So and yet again, women are often taught to cross their legs. So standing cross-legged feels a lot more comfortable or natural for a lot of women than standing in a really open, balanced stance. And the other thing is to think about gestures. Most people's gestures are kind of really small. It's almost like people's elbows are attached. If you're wanting to make a big point, make a big gesture. Again, that's not necessarily something that a lot of women are enormously comfortable with. So if you want more on that, by the way, I don't know, has anybody ever watched this, again, another TED talk, but has anybody ever watched this one, Amy Cuddy? Yeah, thumbs up if anybody's heard of her. No, okay, thumbs down. Thank you, Carol. Yeah, she's a good watch, right? You can see 68 million people or so have watched her. She in that particular talk, she talks about this idea of taking up space. She talks really interestingly about some of the gender dynamics as well. Because she's a Harvard professor, and she says, you can tell that because in the MBA classes, a lot of the marking goes on class contribution. And she says, the people with high status, high presence tend to ask questions like this. They put the hand right up and they do that. And the people with low status and who are nervous and not at all confident, they tend to put their hands up like this. And she says in the talk, funnily enough, there's a correlation between it's usually women doing this and men doing this. But anyway, if you want a bit more on that, I commend that talk to you as well. It's really Good. And it also talks about this whole idea of just taking up space. So that's a body language thing. And here's the thing I think that's most interesting about body language. Sometimes asserting your power isn't easy to do verbally because you butt up against that. If you're too forceful about something, people will call you bossy and pushy and all those double standard kind of things. If, however, your body language speaks authority, that sends a subliminal message to people that here's a person that's really confident and really, really powerful and has presence, gravitas. They're serious. They should be taken seriously. And nobody can argue with that because they probably not even aware of that consciously. They just get that message. So actually, positive, confident, open, expansive body language is really important. And here's my question for you. If you're thinking about calibrating yourself, how do you know? Right? I mean, we know a little bit in this environment, don't we? Because we have to look at ourselves while we talk. But in the real world, how do we know what we're doing with our body language? Are you even aware of it? So, you know, maybe you need to ask some friends or colleagues or watch some video of yourself, which I know nobody likes doing. But yeah, get a sense of, are you projecting a really confident body language or not? And it's not always easy to know. Okay. Oh yes, and I suppose one other thing to mention on body language is facial expressions. Over smiling, again, because we're people pleasers, we always talk to smile. Even when somebody's having a real old go at us, we still smile. And there is such a thing as over smiling. If you're not happy or you're disagree with something, or you think somebody said something that's very wrong, don't feel obliged to smile. It sends mixed messages. Okay, let's talk about voice. So voice, again, is something that sends a message that this is a person of authority and power or not. Things that women typically get wrong. Probably the first and most important of all those three is this thing about volume. Remember, if you remember nothing else, remember this about volume. It's about presence, not about audibility. So many women I see talk in meetings in such a quiet, sort of timid little voice that, you know, you can kind of just about hear them, but they don't actually carry any weight or authority with it. It's just, they sound a little bit timid and a little bit little girl-like maybe. You've got to use a volume that fills the space and commands a bit of authority. If people struggling to even hear you, you're much easier to talk over or to, you know, just to not take very seriously.